Hello, Matt Sergiou here. In case you don't know, I'll just let you know that I run the websites The Occult Beatles and also Conspiro Media. I'm also a co-host of the Beatles-related set of regular podcasts that goes by the title of Magical Mystery Talk. And I'm a co-host of that along with Desiree of the Number 9 blog, which is a Beatles blog, and also Mark Devlin. And it's with regards to Mark Devlin that I'm speaking to you now, because in October 2020, I had the opportunity of chatting with Mark about the life and times of John Lennon, because October 9th is when John Lennon was born, October 9th, 1940. So fast forwarding from 1940 to 2020, that is 80 years. So to mark that, myself and Mark got together. I was a guest actually of his Good Vibrations series of podcasts, and this particular one, episode 166, episode 166, concentrating on John Lennon. And here it is.
Good Vibrations.
Welcome to a Good Vibrations Extra, which feels like another revolutionary act to be doing a show on anything other than COVID, Q, or Donald Trump in 2020. I'm certainly looking forward to delving into this and having a distraction from all that madness. The reason I wanted to do this show is because today is an anniversary. 9th of October 2020 would have been the 80th birthday of John Lennon. And so I thought it'd be great to mark the occasion by really diving into this most fascinating and complex of characters. You could analyse him for days in terms of the depth of his character, I feel. There's so much to say about him as an artist, as a man. And there's no one better to join me in this conversation than my co-collaborator on the Magical Mystery Talk series. He's the proprietor of the Occult Beatles and the Conspiro Media blog sites, and he knows a hell of a lot about the Beatles and specifically John Lennon. Welcome on to Matt Sergiou.
Hello, mate. I'm just wondering, you know, when you said today would have been John Lennon's 80th, there might be some listening who might think, well, he's still alive and it is his 80th. You know, that other theory. So
yes. Maybe we should address that.
Quagmire, isn't it?
Maybe we should address that at some point, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
But other than that, I mean, would you agree with my statement there that John is one of the most fascinating characters that's ever lived, I think, to get inside what made the man tick?
Yeah, a man of many contradictions, I think.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm in my 50s now, and early 50s, and I've been a fan of the Beatles since I was 3-4 years old. And because I've been such a huge fan of theirs from such an early age, obviously I've listened to the music throughout all those years, and because I love them so much and I loved their music so much from such an early age, I also delved into the history and read all the books there were, and I've watched the documentaries and TV interviews and radio things, you know, radio interviews and so on and so on. And even at this stage in my life, after all of that, I still can't get my head around John Lennon. What was he all about? Was he this saint that many people would hold him up to be? Well, I would say no. No human is a saint. He certainly had his flaws. Whether you're a fan of his or not, he certainly had those flaws. Whichever side of the fence you're on towards, you know, with regards to Lennon, whether you think he was great or not, even if you think he was great, you will, you know, even if you're in that camp, you will say, yeah, he had his flaws. But was he legit? You know, when it comes to the protesting, or was it an act? Was it part of a social engineering exercise? Was it a double bluff on the public? Just so many contradictions. Here's a man who preached about peace and love, and at the same time, he admitted himself he beat his wife once or twice. He was an angry man, a physical man who used to fight a lot, physical fights back in the days in Hamburg and Liverpool and even beyond in the 70s. Mm-hmm. a man of many, many contradictions. He had a cruel sense of humour, but but other people have also said he had a cruel sense of humour, but that could injure people. Just his words could injure and hurt. But at the same time, he was also a loving and a caring person, other people would say. So, yeah, for me personally, I just find him a complete and utter confusion, if you like. I don't know which side of the fence to go on with regards to whether he was this legit figure of peace, and he was, let's say he was he on our side fighting the man, as they used to call it, the establishment, the man, as they used to call it back in the 60s and 70s, or was it all a sham? I don't know. Even at this stage in my life, I don't know.
Well, I think a really good place to start would be to get this out of the way early on and consider what each of the Beatles would have made of COVID 1984, this shit show that we're living through at the moment. I mean, with Paul, if it is Paul, we don't really have to wonder, because he took part in that One World at Home concert curated by Lady Gaga, where he's performing in his living room. And as far as I can make out, he's not had a whole lot else to say about it. He's been fairly silent and, I would imagine, compliant with things. If George was still around, he'd probably be meditating his whole way through it and saying, don't worry, man, it's all a temporary experience. It will soon be over. All things must pass. Ringo would probably be wearing a mask and doing what he's told. But I think he is. I mean, I think I've seen photographs of both Paul and Ringo with the masks, and especially Ringo with the mask and doing his, continual V sign, his peace sign. Such peaceful times we live in. And I really do think that if John was still around, he would have had something to say about this. I don't think there's any way he'd be silent, knowing how outspoken he was about politics and current events. I really feel he would be a very loud voice in among this narrative. How do you feel about that?
Again, I'm coming back to what I was saying earlier about I don't know which way to take John Lennon, because he could be one or the other. He was such a contradictory figure. My feeling is, though, if I had to make a decision, well, I do, because you've asked me and I'm answering it. I would say I would err towards the direction of, yes, he would have something to say. Whether what he had to say, what he would have had to have said, what he would have said would have been detrimental towards the so-called establishment. He would have been criticising the whole thing, but as to how far he would have gone with that, I don't know. I'm not sure whether he would have gone as far, very far, or just a little bit. I'm not sure, but I think he would have thrown in a few truth bombs. I think he would have, definitely. But how far he would have taken it, I don't know.
I wonder if he would have been a Donald Trump fan, because he was no fan of Richard Nixon and others in the American political establishment. I wonder what he would have made of Trump.
I don't know. There are claims. I can't remember who said it, but there are claims that towards the end of his life, he was actually erring towards Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan hadn't actually been elected as president. Actually, he was. I think.
Yeah, he'd been elected, but he hadn't quite taken office at that point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think you're right. And there were, I think there's a couple of people who've said since that John Lennon was actually moving away kind of from the left, if you like, the left sphere of politics, and was looking and was kind of digging Ronald Reagan. This is what I mean with John Lennon. You never knew where you were with him.
Yeah, very unpredictable.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to know what he would have thought of 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Well, he loved New York, so that would have hit him very close to home, close to his heart.
I can't see him with regards to 9/11 being quiet.
No, absolutely not. And I really think the lyrics to his song Nobody Told Me apply to these times. Nobody told me there'd be days like these. Strange days indeed. Most peculiar, mama.
Yeah.
Ain't that the truth? And to me, there's a real contrast between the John Lennon of the Beatles days and prior to the Beatles, and the man who emerged from that group in sort of 1969, 1970 as the group split, and went on to make some of the most incredible and incisive music from 1970 to 1980. That last decade of his life stands in great contrast to everything he'd done in the Beatles years. It's almost as if it was two different men, and I'm not suggesting that is the case. I know there are some who would claim that there has been more than one John Lennon. I'm still stuck on McCartney. I can only handle one at a time. And I'm not endorsing that theory. I lean towards there only having been one John Lennon, but he certainly seems to have been quite schizophrenic in his personality and the way he conducted himself and the way what he put into his art. So it seems like there was the John Lennon of the Beatles, and then there was the guy that made all that music in the 1970s. That seems to be a real split in the timeline for me.
I don't know. Yeah, he did tend to, when he was a lot younger, when he was in the Beatles, say, the mop top era. So we're talking, 62 till, let's say, about 65.
Yeah.
Although the mop top thing did go on till about 1966, the year prior to Sgt. Pepper coming out, and the acid and the LSD and the so-called Summer of Love. But yeah, let's say 62 when they became famous, to let's say 65. Yeah, he was this young kind of happy-go-lucky, kind of jokey, kind of, very witty. I mean, he was always very witty. I mean, he was witty from when he was a teenager, before anyone knew him, so people say, right up until, his death. But yeah, in those earlier mop top years, it was all very kind of chirpy. It had a kind of a chirpy edge to it. But then you find from about 65-ish onwards, the chirpiness was starting to go. If you look at some of the interviews that all of the Beatles were giving around that time, they weren't as chirpy. They were still witty and funny and engaging and charming and all the rest of it, but there did seem to be less of the chirpiness. And I think that was down to, I mean, they've talked about it since, and they talked about it at the time as well, actually, in some interviews, and it was down to the interviewers. They were just getting asked a lot of dumb questions. You've got to remember, back in the 60s, they were a boy band back then, 62 to about 64, 65. They were a boy band. So they were getting interviewed a lot by teen magazines, magazines like music magazines for teenagers and for young girls. So a lot of the questions they were getting and it was always the same questions, whichever magazine it was always the same questions, what's your favorite, flavor, chocolate? What do you have for breakfast? What do you have for breakfast? What's your favorite kind of girl? Do you like blondes or brunettes? What's your favorite TV show? What's your favorite music? It was on and on, constant. Whichever magazine they spoke to, just about, it was always the same questions. And it got to the point where, remember, these guys were being interviewed every day. They were living kind of a very busy kind of lifestyle from about 63, when Beatlemania, so-called Beatlemania, hit, till about 66. They virtually had no days off almost. They had the odd fortnight vacation here and there, but it was mostly day after day after day of TV shows, followed by a radio interview, followed by press interviews, followed by magazine interviews, followed by recording a couple of songs for an album that had to come out in a few weeks' time. So they had to find time to go into the studio within that hectic schedule to fit in a couple of hours to record a couple of songs. Then they go and do a TV show. Then they go and do another magazine interview. So it was like this every single day from about 1963 to 66. So if you imagine how many of those dumb magazine interviews they had to give in that 3-year hurricane period of just this constant work, you can understand why that chirpiness kind of edged off. And then, of course, in 67, 66, when they started to take acid, then, of course, the chirpiness, to me anyway, that's when the chirpiness really started to, go. And the change started to come. I think LSD had a lot to do with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you alluded to, in something you said earlier, John was always a joker and a comedian, and you look at some of these early interviews they did, he was always the one cracking one-liners and quips and stuff. And according to Cynthia, his first wife, in her book A Twist of Lennon, she talked about how he used to enjoy mocking disabled people. Very cruel.
Yeah.
And he did that publicly a few times. It was a very morbid sense of humour that he had.
He did it a lot. He did it a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
On stage as well. And he was reportedly a lousy father to Julian. You know, he was absent. He didn't play any great part in his upbringing. He's rumoured to have dabbled in homosexuality. You know, there's some that think he was in some sort of homosexual affair with Stu Sutcliffe, and there's a picture of him with Andy Warhol where they've their hands on each other's crotches. But then post Yoko, ironically, after Yoko comes into his life, he then becomes a political activist. He seems to become very spiritually aware and makes all these incredible songs like Instant Karma and Mind Games. Then you have the birth of Sean, and he's obviously a very loving, doting, devoted father to Sean, takes a few years off to become a house husband and raise Sean. And all of this stands in great contrast to how he was with Cynthia, under Yoko's influence, seemingly. And this is a puzzling one because according to many researchers in the conspiracy realm, Yoko was put into his life as his handler to kind of keep him in order and rein him in. So I don't know how we reconcile these things, but two very different aspects to his character before and after the arrival of Yoko.
Yeah. Where do I go with this? My goodness.
Well, there's a lot there. Yeah.
There's a lot there because, I know this is my dilemma. You see, you can look at Yoko Ono and say, she was quite. You can see it. She was instrumental in pushing him towards the bed-ins and the peace, and going towards the peace.
Hooking up with Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin and all them, and Michael X, of course.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. That some of this is a little bit dodgy. Some of this does make me, a bit uneasy. Like Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman. There was a lot of people, certainly, who thought they were put there. They were kind of like intel, sort of plants, if you like, U.S. protesters of the so-called activist scene of the 1960s that were
controlled opposition.
Controlled opposition to make the peace movement look crap, look idiotic. Some of the stunts they pulled, because that was what they used to do, wasn't it? Their form, Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, what they used to do, their form of protest in the late 60s was basically what they call theatre. It was protesting against the Vietnam War and against the system, but doing it in a kind of theatrical way, which they told the public was in order to not just bring a bit of fun into it, but also to sharpen the attention of people, to make them look and pay more attention to the issues that were being discussed. But on the other hand, you could say that what they were doing was actually making the Vietnam peace movement an absolute bloody joke, because the world that they came from, I can't remember if both of them came from this background or whether it was just Jerry or Abby, but one or both of them came from the traditional Vietnam sort of, or the traditional protest movement of the mid 60s. So very traditional, going to protests, banners, holding banners, having meetings and that kind of thing. And what they did then is the two of them went off and kind of went to this quote unquote theatre route. But there are people that say, but they kind of made it like a joke, as compared to where the world that they came from and then that they went into. It all became a bit too flippant, and it made the seriousness of the issue look stupid. Like there's one particular protest. I can't remember how it transpired or how it got to this point, but it ended with either one or two of them, Rubin or Hoffman or both. There was a march, there was a demonstration, and it ended, and Allen Ginsberg was there as well, well-known supporter of paedophilia, beat poet, and an influence on the Beatles and the whole counterculture, the so-called counterculture of the 60s. He was part of this as well. And what they did, that this protest, this day of protest, this anti-Vietnam thing, culminated in them going to the Pentagon and trying to levitate it. this was what they did. They stood around the Pentagon, all these people, and they tried to levitate the Pentagon. And they had Allen Ginsberg going, Om, which was one of his things that he used to do, apart from taking his clothes off and running around naked, which was another thing he used to do quite a bit of, apparently. So
sounds like mockery, doesn't it?
It sounds like mockery. I mean, if you're a middle class, if you're a working class, middle class, if you're just a normie, okay, if you're just a normal day-to-day regular woman, regular guy, just going to work, looking after the kids, coming home, and how are you going to sell the anti-Vietnam message to these people by freaking them out with this stuff? This is not going to sell a very serious issue to the people that you need to get on your side. Yeah. Okay, it's great to have the radicals and the youngsters and the teenagers on your side. Yeah, they will dig this kind of thing. They will go for that kind of protest and think it's fun and funny and whatever. But they're not the people you need to attract. You need to attract them, but you also need to attract the so-called normal, regular people. And you're not going to do that, I would argue, by putting across this kind of thing,
The question is, was John a knowing and willing part of these stunts, or was he being had along with the public? Was he being mugged off in his involvement with these things?
Well, it's interesting because, as you know, what happened was when John Lennon and Yoko Ono moved to America and predominantly to New York in, I think it was 1971, where they effectively stayed in America. Well, John Lennon didn't leave after that. He stayed in America till his death in 1980.
Yeah. Never set foot back in the UK, did he?
No, he didn't. Although he was planning to, in 1981, come back for a Beatles reunion, as we've discussed before. And then he got shot, and that didn't happen. But that's another story. Anyway, when he came to New York, what they wanted to do, what John and Yoko wanted to do, was to get involved in the protest movement, because by 1971 everything was really hotting up in America with what was going on. There was civil rights issues, there was the Black Panthers, there was Vietnam, of course, there was Nixon, the very, very unpopular Republican president. There was all this stuff going on and more. And John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and especially John Lennon, he wanted to get into this. He wanted to get involved. He didn't just want to write and record songs. He also wanted to actually get very active within it. And that's what he did. And of course, it culminated in 1972 with him, with the US government and President Nixon finding out that John Lennon was, what happened was John Lennon was making noises from about 1971 and through 1972, the year of the presidential election. He was making noises that he wanted to, he was saying in public, and he was also saying it to other people and not making it very secretive at all. What he wanted to do was he wanted to organize like a concert tour, like a US concert tour. One of the ideas that he floated was he wanted it to be an all-star concert tour with him, maybe Eric Clapton and a few other people, a few other musicians. But what he wanted the tour to be was like a radical political concert tour of the US, in which he would go around and, in his words, these are the words he used, to radicalize the audience, to wake them up to radical issues, to get them to wake up to what was going on in Vietnam, to wake them up to the Black Panthers and their issues, and to women's liberation and various other issues that were going on, so-called radical politics. And as I say, what he wanted to do was have this nationwide tour. And he floated the idea of going to various cities and towns across the US with this tour, with or without these all-star guests, and to do this concert tour. And then and within the auditorium, or outside the auditorium, in the foyer, if you like, in the reception area, to have radical groups turn up within these cities, local radical groups to turn up, whether it be the Black Panthers or the Weathermen, even whoever, to turn up and to hand out leaflets and to basically to radicalize the audiences. And what there's an investigator, a journalist by the name of John Weiner. I think that's how you pronounce his name, and he in more in the 1990s, what he did is he managed to get a lot of it through the freedom of information. He managed to get a lot of FBI documents released, because of course the FBI started to monitor John Lennon from around this time. And what John Weiner has managed to do from about the 1990s into the 2000s was he managed to get a lot of these FBI documents of the surveillance notes. A lot of them are redacted, but he's got a lot of them, and he's written a book about what he's found, and he's put it all into a book. And I think there's been a documentary about it as well. I think it's called The US versus John Lennon or something like that. So what he's discovered and what he claims is that President Nixon was absolutely shitting himself, because he realized, because in 1972 a lot more younger people were going to be able to vote. So we're talking about the 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds, around that age group were going to be allowed to, they were going to be given the vote. Nixon got wind of this tour that Lennon and others within his camp were talking about, and he absolutely shat himself, because he thought, my God, if the young people are going to go and register to vote, and they've got John Lennon, like the biggest star from the biggest group of entertainers there's ever been, and we've got him going around America with this massive influence amongst the young, let alone anybody else, selling radical politics and getting them to vote against the Vietnam War and effectively to vote against the Republican Party and President Nixon, then President Nixon thought to himself, my God, I might actually lose this election. So that's when he got the FBI involved in monitoring John Lennon. And this went on till about 1974, 75. And this eventually culminated in attempts to deport Lennon, to take away his visa. Lennon wanted to stay in America, but there was this campaign by the US immigration services to have him thrown out. So they were always trying to cut his visa, always trying to deport him. So what Lennon did was he hired this top-notch quality lawyer by the name of Leon Wildes. And according to Leon Wildes, and he's the guy that actually successfully managed to get Lennon his green card in 1975, so that he could effectively remain in the United States, to get the US, basically to get the immigration services to stop this. I've got a quote here from Wildes from 1983, and this is actually from John Weiner's book, Come Together, John Lennon in His Time, one of his books. And this is to do with Jerry Rubin, and it says, and I quote, this is what Attorney Wildes is quoted as saying from 1983, and I quote, "I received information from someone who claims that Jerry Rubin was a CIA plant, that his task was to bait John Lennon and get information about him for the CIA. This source sent me all kinds of what they claimed was documentation. I showed it to John and Yoko, and Rubin himself, according to this book, said that John, and I quote, considered the possibility that I, Rubin, was a CIA agent." There were others within the so-called radical movement in the 60s and early 70s that were a little bit suspicious of Rubin as well. Funnily enough, Rubin got out of so-called radical politics and became a millionaire businessman.
Yeah,
quite a jump, but
John had some comments to make about the CIA in his infamous Playboy interview, of course, in 1980, where he said we must never forget to thank the CIA for the emergence of LSD. Basically, he was laying all that at the door of the CIA, so he seemed to have no love for the agency. And this kind of brings us back to the true nature of the Beatles, because there are many alternative researchers who are of the view that the Beatles themselves were a social engineering operation closely tied to the Tavistock Institute in London and British military intelligence, working in tandem with the CIA at the time of the counterculture, both in America and Britain. And I certainly think that there's some evidence to suggest that the Beatles did fulfill that role. So John would have been right in the heart of that kind of activity during his years in the Beatles, whether he realised fully what the group's agenda was or not. But it seems to me that he was doing a bit of atoning for what he'd been a part of in the Beatles in his post-Beatles years. in terms of becoming involved in these political movements and becoming an activist, and also in the nature of music that he was putting out, truth music and spiritually enlightening music and all this kind of stuff. Do you ever get the sense that he was kind of atoning for what he might have considered past sins in his latter years?
I don't know. Maybe. Again, it's back to what I said right at the beginning, I don't know what to think of him. I really honestly don't. He was such a contradictory figure. You can say, whichever way you look at it, whether you're pro John Lennon or anti, in terms of, for example, if you think that John Lennon was a social engineer and a willing social engineer and remained to be one through till his death, or you believe vice versa, or maybe maybe if you look at it in a third way, you might believe one of each, so half of each.
Or that there were two John Lennons. I'm really trying not to go there.
Two John Lennons, yeah. This is the problem. I don't know what to think. I mean, I really, really don't know what to think. I mean, the thing is, what we were saying earlier about Yoko Ono pushing John towards, the bed-ins and the peace and everything. I mean, the thing is that from what they said later, they kind of regretted the direction they took with this. When John Lennon first hooked up with Yoko Ono, and this is not, and I'm not defending Yoko Ono here. I'm just putting it across as it has been put across by John Lennon and other authors and researchers and so on. But when they began with this peace stuff in 1968, 69, it was very apolitical. It wasn't. That's how I see it. Okay, it didn't look political to me. What it was basically John Lennon and Yoko Ono sitting in a bed. I mean, yeah, you could call that art, theatre. Theatre protest, a bit like Jerry Rubin, but perhaps not as ridiculous as
and Allen Ginsberg taking all his clothes off and running around naked.
Yeah. Well, thank God he didn't do that, but he did actually do that in front of George Harrison and John Lennon at a party in 1964, I think it was.
And there were none too impressed.
No, they walked out. He said, John Lennon said to him, "Excuse me, I've brought my wife here, Cynthia. Don't you have any respect?" So, yeah, but that was very apolitical. I mean, if you listen to the way John Lennon was talking during those bed-ins, he wasn't saying that people should go out and vote for a party, to get involved in politics, let's say, get involved in the left, to get rid of the right, to fight against Vietnam. It was all about personal empowerment. That's how I took it. It was all about personal empowerment and taking responsibility for your own actions and using love, not diktats and documents and parliaments and senates to gain power. And if you, this is the way I saw it anyway, if you get personal power within yourself, then you are your own master. You are like you are your own parliament, and then you can go out, sort your own house out, basically, was what he was saying during those bed-ins. But then you see, as the years go on, especially when he went to America and he got mixed up with Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman and the Black Panthers, maybe to a degree, and certain others, then he became political. Then that's when the politics came in, because he was getting mixed up in the new left, as it was called. He was getting mixed up in radical left politics, the school of thought that comes from the Frankfurt School, that kind of school of thought, that kind of new left, as it was called back then, and mixing with these radicals like Tariq Ali, as well, who was a radical activist of the 60s, late 60s. Oh, he's still going now, but he was predominantly from Great Britain, a member of the International Marxist Group. He started mixing with people like this. And in later years, and again, I've got some quotes here, in later years, John Lennon did suggest that he went along in that direction because he was courted by these people. Whether he was courted by these people because they were CIA plants, as I mentioned earlier, is a matter of conjecture, I suppose, a matter of discussion. But apparently, the way John Lennon says it is, Yoko Ono didn't want him to go in that direction. She didn't want him to go in that radical politics direction. She wanted him to remain in this apolitical area that he had been with the bed-ins and the way that he was talking before he went to America, basically. And I've got a quote here. I don't know where it's from, so apologies for that. But what he says is, the biggest mistake Yoko and I made in that period, and he's talking about the early 70s, was allowing ourselves to become influenced by the male, macho, quote-unquote, serious revolutionaries and their insane ideas about killing people to save them from capitalism and or communism, depending on your point of view. We should have stuck to our own way of working for peace, i.e. bed-ins and so on and so on. And he also talks about the song Power to the People. He got it's a great song. I love that song, Power to the People. But in later years, he wasn't very he kind of attacked it, because he felt that he was made to write that because the radical left, the political radical left, the people that were involved in the politics of it, not the bed-in types, were making him feel guilty for not getting more active, more politically active. So out of guilt, this is what he says, out of guilt, he felt he should write a song that had that kind of workers unite kind of feel to it, that sort of socialist, quote unquote, Marxist, if you like, kind of vibe to it. But in later years, after he said he regretted hanging out with the quote unquote, this is another quote, hanging out with the Cambridge Graduate School of Revolutionaries. They made us feel guilty about not hating everyone who wasn't poor. And he named Power to the People, the song, as an example of that. And I think when he's talking about Cambridge Graduate School of Revolutionaries, he's talking about people like Tariq Ali, who is actually an Oxford graduate. He was part of the International Marxist group, but he was educated at Oxford. And there's another guy by the name of Robin Blackburn, who was kind of in cahoots with Tariq Ali at that time in the late 60s, very much part of the radical political system in Britain. And he's from Oxford as well. I think his name was Robin Blackburn. He was taught at Oxford as well. So you got this kind of higher, these people from the so-called elite schools telling the working classes how they should go. Interestingly enough, Robin Blackburn was taught at the London School of Economics and ended up teaching there as well. But
they call it champagne socialism, don't they?
Champagne socialism from the LSE. So make of that what you will.
From LSD to the LSE. You mentioned communism there, and a criticism that's often levelled at arguably John Lennon's most famous song, Imagine, which ironically is probably my least favourite Lennon song. There's so many better that he did.
Me too.
Yeah, and yet Imagine is the one that always comes to mind and always gets featured in mainstream documentaries and such. And many people feel that if you study the lyrics to that, it comes across as a kind of communist manifesto or a New World Order type anthem. And the funny thing is, he dropped that song at the same time as he was also putting out songs like Give Me Some Truth, where he's laying into the political system and he's scathing about all the lies that are told in society. And he was dropping songs like Don't Want to Be a Soldier Mama, which is anti-war, and then Instant Karma, which is spiritual and metaphysical. And he's dropping all these songs round about the same time. And it's just another aspect of this sort of schizophrenic aspect to his personality, where you've got these contradictory messages coming all the time. And how do you ever reconcile any of that?
I don't know. I've been looking at this for like 40 odd years and I still can't reconcile it. I just can't, and I really can't. I mean, the social engineering thing. I mean, like you say, were the Beatles part of a social engineering thing, knowingly or unknowingly, and to what extent, whichever way you look at it, at what extent was John Lennon, involved in that? Oh gosh.
Well, they quite clearly were in their latter period. They were pushing LSD, they were pushing the counterculture, they were pushing all these, new ideas, psychedelia, in line with all
Yeah.
these changes in
Yeah.
society. Whether they were doing it of their own volition or whether they were doing it under instruction, they clearly were a part of pushing all that stuff. And
Yeah,
research
they
in
were.
recent years has shown that all of that was social engineering at the hands of the likes of the Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt School and all these other organisations.
Yeah, I would go, in that direction. I think whether they were willing or not, one or more of the band were pushing things. And I've talked about this with you and others, in various podcasts and written articles about them, and I continue to, about how the LSD and the countercultural scene was pushed predominantly by McCartney. Seems to be the guy that I've looked towards, because he seems to have been the one that pushed the whole counterculture thing within the Beatles the most,
with great enthusiasm.
Great enthusiasm with the avant-garde music scene, which was, as I've said before, the avant-garde art scene, whether it's poetry, music, painting, whatever it is, it's in my opinion, from what I've gathered, it's the foundation of the counterculture, the 60s counterculture in Britain and America, but especially in Britain. The avant-garde movement is the foundation, and then on top of that you've got LSD, and Paul McCartney, before even Lennon, was pushing that. Now, as for Lennon, he does come into this because he took part in all the stuff that the avant-garde and LSD within the Beatles camp brought to the fore. He was part of it. Whether he helped to produce the McCartney's influences through songs like Tomorrow Never Knows, which is a Lennon song. John Lennon wrote the song Tomorrow Never Knows based on the so-called Tibetan Book of the Dead by Timothy Leary, and it's almost, in places, it's almost word for word. It came out in 1966, a year prior to Sergeant Pepper, and if you listen to that song, it's basically the book itself. For anyone who doesn't know, the book itself is basically a book about how to go on an acid trip. It's like a guide, it gives you tips on how to go on an acid trip, and it was put together by Timothy Leary and others. And John Lennon took that words from that book and turned it into a song, Tomorrow Never Knows.
So the question is, did John do that voluntarily out of his own interest and fascination in the subject matter, or was he commissioned to do it? I guess we'll never know.
Exactly, but whether one or the other, the influences that were coming within the Beatles and from outside and into the Beatles with regard to the avant-garde, it got into him. It got to him. That's what I'm trying to say. It got to him, and he used that, and he used it in the Sgt. Pepper album and in Revolution Number 9, that avant-garde sound collage on the so-called White Album of 1968. So whether he was willing or not in some kind of social engineering thing, he definitely got product. He got product out of it. He gave us product. There is a sound clip. I know there's a sound clip of John Lennon actually talking about the 60s that I'd like to play. I know for anyone listening to this on YouTube that they might not get this because of the copyright issues. I mean, do you want me to play this? And
sure. Yeah, we got the full version of this show is going out on BitChute, where there's no copyright problems. So for the full experience, listen on BitChute. Hopefully people are. But yeah, play the clip by all means.
Right. Okay. This is a clip from 1970. I think it's from the infamous Rolling Stone interview that John Lennon gave back then. And someone put the question to John Lennon. Just looking at my notes here. The question to John, this is with regards to the 60s. Okay, so this is the end of the 60s, 1970, 71. And the person that's asking him the question asks him, what do you think the effect was of the Beatles on the history of Britain? And the way that Lennon answers it, he doesn't really talk about the history of Britain. What he talks about is actually the 1960s and the whole counterculture and how it was sold to people and what it actually was to him. Okay.
The people are in control and in power, and the class system and the whole bullshit bourgeois scene is exactly the same, except that there's a lot of fag fucking middle class kids with long hair walking around London in trendy clothes. But apart from that, nothing happened, but we all dressed up. The same bastards are in control. The same people are running everything. It's exactly the same. They hyped the kids and the generation. We've grown up a little, all of us, and there has been a change, and we are a bit freer and all that, but it's the same game. Nothing's really changed, you know. It's the same history of Britain. Shit, they're doing exactly the same things. Killing blacks on the street. People are living in fucking poverty with fucking rats crawling over them. It's the same, you know. It just makes you puke, and I woke up to that too, you know. That dream is over. It's just the same. I mean, that's what it is, man. Nothing happened except for we grew up, you know. We did our thing, just like they were telling us, well, you kids, you know, it's exactly the same. Most of the so-called now generation are getting in a job and all that. Nothing changed. We're a minority, you know. We're a minority, like people like us always were.
So that's it. That's basically what he said. He's kind of like looking back at the 60s counterculture and saying it was crap. It was basically all a sham.
Well, it puts me in mind of his song God, simply called God, where he just goes through this long list of things he no longer believes in. It's quite nihilistic. He's saying, I don't believe in... Well, he says, I don't believe in Jesus, I don't believe in Buddha, I don't believe in Hitler, I don't believe in Beatles, I don't believe in Zimmerman, and he just goes on, and then he just says, I just believe in me, Yoko and me. And then he goes on to say, the dream is over. And it's as if he's getting very cynical as he thinks back to the Beatles years and what they were a part of. And at that point in his life, it just seems to mean nothing to him. It's lost all its value.
Yeah. And with regards to the dream is over, there's an interview they actually gave for who I mentioned earlier, Tariq Ali, for I think it was the magazine Red Mole in 1970, 71, around that kind of time. And he talks there about the 1960s again, and he says the acid dream is over. So take that what way you may. Is he insinuating that the whole acid thing was a sham? And if he is he kind of telling us that he knew it was all along, or what? You know,
I mean, I personally get the impression that he didn't quite comprehend what it was he was a part of while the agenda was running in the Beatles. But in later years, he came to realise what it had all been about, and he became regretful of it. And he felt that he had some atoning to do, which is why he made certain comments in interviews and he put certain lyrics in songs. That's just the feeling I get about it.
You could be right. I really don't know. I can't say.
Well, we can only speculate and guess on all of this, can't we?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said right at the beginning, you know, and as I've said throughout, you know, I just find it very difficult to pick. It's just one. He's not one or the other, is he? He's all over the blooming place, and I just don't know what to think. You know.
Well, I made the comment earlier that he appears to be schizophrenic, and I have to wonder whether there might be elements of mind control programming going on here, because when you look back at the Beatles, certainly there's lots of symbolism when you learn to spot the signs and the symbols and you know what they all mean. There's lots of symbolism hinting at trauma-based mind control, monarch programming, aspects of MKUltra in the Beatles' work, in their record sleeves, in certain press photos and such. And there have been many suspicions among alternative researchers that the Beatles were subject to this, particularly McCartney, and Lennon would have been a part of that as well if that had really been a thing within the Beatles. So could John's different personalities and his different seemingly self-contradictory behaviour be a result of mind control programming and different alters, different personalities coming through, which is symptomatic of someone who's undergone that programming? And I mentioned earlier that many people feel that Yoko was put into his life as a kind of mind control handler to rein him in and dictate his behaviours and stuff and make sure he didn't go off script. So we have to factor that possibility in, I feel.
Yeah, she Yoko Ono. Wow, yeah, what a subject. You must know of that quote that John Lennon. I don't know when he made the quote. I'm paraphrasing here, but he used to talk. He was recalling his childhood, And he talked about how when he was a child, I don't know how young he was, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, he used to stand in front of the mirror and rub his eyes or stare into the mirror and get himself into an alpha state. That's how he described it. I'm just paraphrasing now. I can't remember where the quote came from or when he said it, but I do recall him saying he used to look into the mirror and put himself into an alpha state. Why would you do that? It's just
like all 7 or 8 year old kids do, you know. I mean, we've all done it.
Exactly. I mean, Yoko Ono. I mean, you know, she's got the MO, hasn't? I mean, you look at her MO. It's all there, isn't it? I mean, you know, geez.
She's descended from the Japanese royalty or aristocracy from the Emperor of Japan on her mother's side. And on her father's side, she's part of an elite banking dynasty out of Japan. So a couple of red flags there. And she seemed to have fulfilled a kind of mother role in John's life, didn't she? John had
he used to call her mother, didn't he?
Yeah, he had mother issues because he was raised by his Aunt Mimi when his mother, Julia, you know, seemingly didn't want to raise him. And then I think he sort of got to know Julia a bit later on in life. And just at the point that he was drawing close to her, she was tragically killed by an off-duty policeman who mowed her down in her car. So that was obviously a very traumatic event. And then, as you say, when Yoko came into his life, she seemed to act as a kind of mother figure to him. And he even referred to her as mother. So there's some very strange stuff going on there in terms of her relationship to him.
Yeah, very strange. I mean, it depends how far you want to take this. I mean, for example, I mean, I think it was Pete Shotton, who was his friend from Liverpool. Like they met when they were like 4 or 5 years old. So they went to school. They went to like elementary school together, and they grew up together. And Pete Shotton was in Liverpool. Obviously, the two of them were kids. Playing together, and they when John Lennon formed his band the Quarrymen, which later became the Beatles, Pete Shotton was initially in that band. Eventually he left. I think he went on and became a policeman, I think, and then went to work for John Lennon. I think John Lennon bought him a supermarket after he became famous. He bought Pete Shotton a supermarket. But the thing is that I think it was Pete Shotton who said John Lennon always had to have someone with him. He was never alone. Now, am I stooping too much or reaching out too far or too much to suggest that would suggest that he always had a handler? I mean, first it was Pete Shotton. I was reading Mark Lewison's book about the Beatles, and apparently back in those days, Pete Shotton and John Lennon were so together that they actually had a nickname. Their school friends gave them a nickname where they put John's name and Pete Shotton's name together to make one name. I can't remember what the name was. It was something like Shannon or something like that, you know, where they get the two surnames and put them. I can't remember what the name was exactly, but it was getting their two names and putting them together, either their first names or their second names, to make it one name. That's how together they were. And then when you look through John's life after Pete Shotton, it was Paul McCartney, and to some degree Stuart Sutcliffe as well, who was his art student friend who joined the Beatles for a while and then they went to Hamburg and he left. And then it was Paul McCartney, and then after Paul it was Yoko Ono, and then even in that period when Yoko Ono threw him out, when they had their marital problems in 73 and Yoko Ono kicked him out.
He goes off to May Pang.
They had this assistant, this secretary who worked for them by the name of May Pang, who used to work for Apple, the Beatles' Apple company. And then John and Yoko took her on to be their own kind of personal assistant. And when Yoko kicked John out, she told May, or suggested to May, that May should go with John, which is what wife, throws her husband out and tells someone to go and be his mistress? Well,
we're both married, mate, and I can tell you, my wife, that's not the way she would handle things.
Yeah, I think you're square, Mark. I think you're not on the street. You know, Mark, you're not cool enough. You're obviously not with the program. Yeah. The MK program, perhaps. So and of course you got Yoko, and then you look at Yoko Ono, and like you say, she comes from this so-called elite stock. I think it was actually Yoko's grandfather who was connected to the bank. He founded the Yasuda Bank, I think which was one of the largest Japanese banks, and it later became the Fuji Bank Limited, I think. And he was also a samurai and a self-made billionaire. And her father, that was on her, I think that was on her mother's side. That was her grandfather from her mother's side, who was the guy who started this bank. And I think her father worked within that company, within that bank. And he's the one that was a descendant of an emperor of Japan, apparently. I think it was the father.
Okay.
I might have got that wrong, but that's what I've discovered anyway.
And just as a by the by, Yoko's father found that his banking business saw him splitting his time between Japan and the United States, and where he settled in New York State was this town called Scarsdale, Westchester County, and it just happens to be the town where Linda Eastman, who became Paul McCartney's wife, Linda McCartney, grew up. So Yoko's family and Linda's family just happen to both be based in Scarsdale, this little-known town in New York State, and then they both end up becoming Beatle wives. So quite a coincidence there.
What are the chances? And what were the Eastmans' name? What was their name before they became the Eastmans? But when they emigrated, I can't remember where it was from the world they emigrated from.
I think it was Lithuania or somewhere, wasn't it?
Was it Jewish Lithuanians? Was it?
And they were known as Epstein, weren't they?
Epstein, exactly. And they changed their name to Eastman when they came to.
I don't know if you've discovered a link, Matt, but I've not discovered any link between Brian Epstein or Epstein, Linda's family, the Epsteins, and Jeffrey Epstein. They appear to be completely unrelated, unless I've missed something.
Well, I haven't looked. I am intrigued, and I will look at some point. I've been so sort of digging elsewhere, as it were, that I haven't had time to look at that. But yeah, it has crossed my mind, and it would not surprise me in the slightest. As you say, Yoko was her father was working. I don't know if he was like jet setting all over the world with this job of his for the Yasuda Bank, but certainly he did go and work in America, which meant that Yoko and her family went, and when she was young, I think when she was a child, they did stay in America for a while, and then they'd go back to Japan and whatever. But another possible telltale sign, apart from all of that, is that sometime in the late 50s, early 60s, not too sure when, I'm not exactly sure when, but Yoko was institutionalized. She was admitted to a psychiatric unit.
It's hard to imagine, I know.
For trying to kill herself. This was in Japan. Failed suicide attempt, and she was broken out of there by an individual by the name of Anthony Cox. Anthony Cox is a film. I think he's a filmmaker, film producer. I think that's his job title. But he was very much connected to the avant-garde. Here we go again, the avant-garde art world, and I think that's a lot. I mean, he knew a lot of people within that kind of world, and I think a lot of his filmmaking was predominantly at that time anyway was based within the avant-garde. I don't know how he got to know Yoko initially, but he's American, and the story goes is that he went to Japan. This was before they married. This was when they were friends, and they broke up when John Lennon came on the scene. So this is obviously it's pre-John, but this is the husband she had before John Lennon. And what he did, he went to Japan and he broke it. He got her out. He broke Yoko Ono out of this institution by pretending to be an American psychiatric doctor. So he posed as a doctor, an American doctor. I don't know how plausible this is, man. He posed as an American doctor, presumably with no papers or anything. I don't know, but he posed as a doctor and got her out and then took her to America. And then I think it was in 1963 they got married.
They had a daughter
together,
Very
interesting.
Didn't
they had a daughter together, called Kyoko. Very interesting individual. He's certainly someone I want to take a much deeper look at. Not so much to do with the Beatles. Well, I want to look at him with regards to the Beatles, but also to do with my other research to do with the 1960s scene in Britain, in London as a whole, which is another of my projects, long-term projects, because it would appear, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how deep he was into this, but I've found information that he was actually one of the earliest people that was into LSD, into acid, before it got it seeped into the counterculture, when the so-called intelligentsia and the military and psychiatrists and certain members of medical institutions were, experimenting with this drug in whatever shape or form, when it was still pretty underground in the early to mid 60s. Anthony Cox was within that world. So then that just makes me wonder, avant-garde, LSD, interesting.
Is he still alive?
He is still alive, I think. He was also a member of a what they call a sect, a so-called sect, a quote-unquote Christian cult, which was called the Church of the Living Word. And it's being described as a mind-controlling Christian cult. And this was sometime he became a member of this sometime in the 1970s, and he broke out sometime in the late 70s, early 80s, and he's actually made a documentary about this quote-unquote cult. And you can find it on YouTube. I can't remember the title of the documentary if you look it up, but if you type in Anthony Cox cult or Church of the Living Word, you might find it. And it was headed by a deep-rocked Christian priest by the name of John Robert Stevens, whose followers believed him to be Jesus Christ. He passed himself off as Jesus Christ, and it's claimed, and I think it's in this documentary, I might be wrong, but it's certainly claimed anyway, that he prayed with his followers for the deaths of Jimmy Carter, who was president of the US in the 70s, late 70s, also David Rockefeller, and also Robert Kennedy. That's things that he used to do with his followers, apparently. And apparently, I think it's in this documentary.
Most people tend to like David Rockefeller or Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, I know.
But not...
Bit bizarre one, that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was a part of this during the 70s. So this was after he divorced Yoko, and Yoko had gone with John. But Anthony Cox stayed pretty close with John and Yoko in the earlier years, when John and Yoko first met and got married in the late 60s, early 70s. And another very interesting individual that he was attached to was a guy by the name of Donald Hamrick. And Donald Hamrick was the leader of this commune. It was formed in the late 1960s in California. It was called the Harbingers Commune. And this Donald Hamrick has been described as being a quote unquote scientist, UFO evangelist. It's also been claimed that this commune, it's been claimed that that basically Donald Hamrick was being payrolled by the CIA, and that this commune of Donald Hamrick, this friend of Anthony Cox's, was being payrolled by the CIA in order to draw in people who were anti-war. So anyone who was anti-Vietnam War, anyone who was connected to any kind of radical peace movement or kind of like civil rights movement were being drawn in by Donald Hamrick into this commune. And it's been claimed that the CIA was bankrolling this in order to get these people that were attached to these groups, these protest groups, these peace groups, so that they could basically get them into one place to monitor them, to spy on them. And it's said, there's been a couple of accusations, you can find them online. It's been claimed that Don Hamrick and this commune was part of the MK Ultra linked project Operation Chaos, which was obviously it was CIA because it's MK Ultra, but it also had ties to the FBI. And basically, like I say, it was this kind of harvesting place. It was a place to attract people that were kind of anti-Vietnam or pro-peace to join this commune, so that they could be monitored and spied on, and possibly harmed as well. And that's what Operation Chaos was. Operation Chaos was an MK Ultra project connected to the CIA, and also FBI was involved in that. And that's what Operation Chaos was. It was a bit like COINTELPRO. It was a way of infiltrating and destabilizing and defaming people, and that kind of thing. So this is the claim that this friend of Anthony Cox's was connected to this. That his commune was connected to this. Now, John Lennon actually met Donald Hamrick, and he was introduced to Donald Hamrick by Anthony Cox. And this happened in 1970. I think it was in 1970. John and Yoko went to Denmark to visit Anthony Cox. He had a farm. He was living on a farm with his wife, Melinda. And so the story goes, is that the way it was sold to John Lennon was, I don't know who sold it to him, but they sold it to him as in, hey, John, we know that you want. Basically, they found someone that they could hypnotize him into giving up smoking. He wanted to give up smoking, and they found this guy who happened to be Donald Hamrick, who could hypnotize him into stopping smoking. And actually, John Lennon talks about this. He talked about this in the Rolling Stone interview that I mentioned earlier from 1970-71. And the way it's weird, because the way he describes it as though Donald Hamrick is trying to hypnotize him, and he's not doing it very well, and it's not working. But then in the middle of this, John Lennon drops this kind of alarm bell. He says that he started to get a little bit concerned. I think that's the word he used. He started to get a bit concerned, a bit worried, when during this process, when Hamrick was trying to hypnotize it, people walked into the room. One who John Lennon described as, quote unquote, a magician who was there to put spells on everybody, whatever that means. Now, the thing is, there's another allegation connected to Don Hamrick, and it comes from Albert Goldman. Now, anyone who's into their Beatles facts will know who Albert Goldman was. He was the author of this so-called controversial book, The Lives of John Lennon, which came out in 1988. It certainly wasn't your typical kind of mainstream biography of a famous person. It didn't put John Lennon on a pedestal, or it was quite very controversial. In fact, there was all sorts of. It's a book I need to read again. I think a lot of the claims about John Lennon's homosexuality, I think, if I'm not mistaken, came originally from that book.
It painted him as a quite unlikable character overall, didn't it?
Yes, that's right. And I really do need to read that book again. It's been 30 odd years since I last wrote it. But according to Albert Goldman, he mentions Don Hamrick. And what Don Hamrick wanted to do, according to what Albert Goldman discovered for this book, was that he wanted to promote the alien agenda to the world. He wanted to promote the communication. This is Albert Goldman's quote. The best way he wanted to promote communication, and he wanted to find the best way of doing this to promote the communication between spacemen and Earthmen to the general public. So the alien agenda. And if anyone who's looked at the alien agenda will probably know that there has been talk, and there has been some research that connects MK Ultra to the alien agenda, where these suggestions of alien abductions have been implanted in MK Ultra victims.
I personally think it's all to do with mind control. All roads lead back to mind control in all these stories, don't they? Whether it's hypnotists or magicians, it's all aspects of mind control and MK Ultra.
Indeed, and this looks like this might be another case of that. I mean, what Don Hamrick wanted to do, according to Albert Goldman, from what his research has found, was that he knew the way Albert Goldman writes it was he knew that the Beatles had sold LSD to the general public, and they'd also sold successfully the transcendental meditation, the TM, Eastern mysticism, the Maharishi, that kind of thing. So with that in mind, Hamrick was so certain that he could get the Beatles to sell the alien agenda, to sell this quote unquote spacemen and Earthmen idea. So what he did, according to Albert Goldman, was Albert Goldman claims that Melinda, Anthony Cox's wife, who was there in Denmark during these hypnotism sessions to quote unquote to so-called get rid of John Lennon's smoking habit. Believe that if you want to or not. She was there. Melinda was there with her husband Anthony Cox and John and Yoko. Goldman claims that Melinda was actually a practicing witch, and that she was also a member of the Harbingers. And Goldman claims that Hamrick had enlisted Melinda to do everything in her powers, her supernatural powers, and I'm using quotes here from the book, to use her powers to bring about this link up, to bring about the Beatles or John Lennon, to bring them to this way of thinking, to make them push this alien agenda, this Earthmen, spacemen idea. Now that's got me thinking, right? So Albert Goldman says that, and that brings me back to that quote that I gave regards Lennon, how he described the hypnotist session.
What kind of year is this, Matt?
This is about 1970.
Okay, so
1970.
Just after 2001: A Space Odyssey has dropped, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well after, a couple of years, I think. So if we go back to how John Lennon described that hypnotism session, he talks about the presence of a magician, right? What if that magician was Melinda? So with that in mind, what I'm thinking is, maybe I'm reaching here, but maybe she was brought in on Don Hamrick's suggestion. Maybe she was that magician that was brought in to feed this idea. Because let's not forget that in later years, it was only 3-4 years after that, John Lennon began to speak very publicly. And again, you can find this stuff on YouTube. He began to talk publicly about how he'd seen UFOs. Yeah. I think one of them was in New York. He walked out of his apartment building and he saw this great big UFO.
He's got a lyric in the song Nobody Told Me where he says, there's UFOs over New York and I ain't too surprised.
That's right. And do you remember when John Lennon shaved his hair? He shaved his hair back in 1970. He made quite a big deal about it, quite a big, sort of in typical John Lennon's fashion. He shaved his hair. Now, am I not wrong in thinking that the whole MK Ultra thing, we're talking 1970, we've got a man who could have been hypnotized here, not to have his smoking habit taken away. Let's forget that. What if, 30 years old, the breaking down of the persona, the breaking down of the MK Ultra persona. And
the shaving of hair is a big part of programming breaking down and reprogramming needing to be done.
That's right. So that's what I'm thinking. I might be reaching, but so we've got this Anthony Cox guy who is connected to Yoko Ono, and we've talked about on the last Magical Mystery Talk. We talked about we discussed the alleged attempts during the 1970s by John Lennon and Paul McCartney and the rest of the Beatles to get back together again. If you recall, we talked about that. Yeah. And May Pang was talking about how in 1975, this was after, because John Lennon was always talking badly about the Beatles. In the main, when he talked about the Beatles following the split, directly after the split, he wasn't very complimentary about the Beatles, especially Paul McCartney. And then it just seems to me when Yoko kicked him out around the end of, I think it was 1973, then all of a sudden he's starting to make overtures of much warmth, not only towards the Beatles possibly reuniting, but towards McCartney.
That's right.
Whereas before it was all very disparaging. He was very disparaging towards McCartney. All of a sudden, the song "How Do You Sleep" and the rest of it, and the interviews that he gave, and then all of a sudden Yoko's out of the picture, and he's talking about Paul McCartney being a great mate and how he misses him, and how saying to people, in interviews, why not, man? I can't see why the Beatles can't get back together again. If I feel like we might do it. And according to May Pang, that's what he discussed this on one or two or three occasions during their time together.
His distance from Yoko, and then the possibility of a reunion with McCartney becomes a possibility with her off the scene.
So if we fast forward to 1975, as I say, we have this scenario where Paul McCartney, John Lennon found out that McCartney was coming to New Orleans to record the Venus and Mars album with his band Wings. And the way that May Pang describes it is that Lennon says to her, "How would you feel, May, if I was to start writing with Paul again?" And she reacted with, stunned joy. She's like, she said to him, to paraphrase, "Well, are you serious? Of course, it's great. Do it, man." So that's, according to May Pang, John Lennon actually booked plane tickets to go to New Orleans and to pay a surprise visit on Paul. And this is like the second or third attempt that he'd tried to get back with Paul, to get this thing moving again, this partnership, this whatever, since the Beatles breakup. Then he actually bought air tickets. According to May, it was all booked, it was all sorted. He was going to go and pay a surprise visit on Paul in New Orleans with a view to writing songs together and a possible Beatles reunion coming from that. Now, there are two versions. That May Pang has given two versions of what happened after he made that decision, but both of them involve hypnotism and both of them involve Yoko Ono. Whichever version of these two you want to believe or not, maybe you don't want to believe either, but according to May Pang, prior to him going to New Orleans, he got a phone call from Yoko, because what Yoko used to do, according to May Pang, even though she'd thrown him out and she said she wanted nothing to do with him anymore, and he was off living his own life as a single man with May Pang.
And that tells you a lot about the nature of their relationship, the fact that she would throw him out.
Ring him. Yeah, she would throw him out and then ring him. Yeah, and go with this possible handler. And then she's ringing every day. This is the thing she's doing. She's ringing the way that May Pang describes it. There wasn't a day that didn't go by that Yoko Ono wasn't ringing, calling John to speak to him about this, that, or the other. And it was on one of these phone calls prior to this visit that John was going to make for this quote unquote Beatles reunion potential. He gets this phone call from Yoko, who says, "Hey, why don't you pop over to the Dakota," which is of course the apartment building where John and Yoko lived, that they had, both prior to the split and then after, of course. She said, "Why don't you come over to the Dakota, because I found a hypnotist who can get rid of your smoking habit." So again, it's this hypnotist and smoking habit thing. So
yeah,
and
is
the
that
way
code for something?
Possibly, I never thought of it that way. You might be right. So the way May Pang describes it is when she said to John, "Please don't go. Please don't go. Don't do this. Please don't do this. I don't feel right about this. Something's not right." And John said to her, "Nah, don't worry. You'll be fine." So off he goes. Now, there's two versions of the story that she's given over a 20-30 year period. For some reason, she's given two different versions, and I don't know why that is. I don't know, but both, as I say, both of them describe this kind of hypnotic kind of scenario. So in this first version, or the two versions, he goes off to see Yoko, and he comes back hours later completely different. The way that May Pang describes it, he comes back like a zombie who is cussing Paul McCartney, who is disparaging of McCartney again, talks badly of Beatles reunions. And then within a day, or I can't remember if it was a day or maybe a week or however long it was, he went back to Yoko. And that was it. That was the end of this split, this period of separation. According to another version, again, she said, May Pang said to John, "Please don't go to this thing. Please don't go to the Dakota and see her." And again, John said, "Don't worry about it." I think this is how it happened. He said, "Don't worry," and off he went. And she didn't see, this happened on a Friday, I think, and she didn't see him again until Monday afternoon, I think, or morning, when she went to an appointment to see a dentist. She and John had booked to see a dentist on the same day at the same time. And John hadn't turned back. He hadn't come back from wherever he'd gone. He just, to May's eyes, he just disappeared. So I'm assuming that she assumed that he was with Yoko at the Dakota. So she goes to this dentist, and she sees John in the kind of in the waiting area sitting down, and she looks at him and she says, like, it's like all the life has drained out of him. It's like it's not him. It's like he's a zombie. It's just not him at all. And he's being very monosyllabic, and there's no warmth there. There's just like it's a different person. It's like it's not him anymore. It's like it's a somebody else. So they leave the dentist's and they go back to her apartment or their apartment, and he says to her, "I'm going back to Yoko." I think that's how it happened. He says to her, "I'm going back," and he starts packing his bag. He gets a bag and he starts packing. And that's it. That's the end. So no reunion with Paul again. That's finished. It's not going to happen. And before he leaves, he hands her something. I can't remember what it was he handed her. I think it was like I might get this wrong, man, but it was like a little souvenir thing. And I can't remember exactly what it was. I'd have to go back to check my facts. But it's like a little souvenir type thing. And she said it had this really disgusting smell. And she took it to an occult magic shop a day or two later, and it was from Yoko. This was a gift from Yoko to May Pang, and she took it to an occult shop because I assume that May knew that Yoko, who's never been very secret about this, is into the occult and into magic.
She did put out an album called Yes, I Am a Witch.
Exactly. And she's into tarot and numerology and much more. And she took it to this shop, and the man behind the counter said, "Whoever gave you this really hates you." So I don't know what this thing was, but it was like some kind of poison chalice.
That reminds me of Rosemary's Baby in the movie. You've got this foul-smelling stuff that is given by the elderly next-door neighbours who are Satanists to Mia Farrow's Rosemary character, and it's said to be tannis root. When she gets it checked out, and it's used in occult rituals. And interestingly, Rosemary's Baby was set in the Bramford, which was actually a new name for the Dakota building where John and Yoko lived. So there's another connection from the Beatles and John back into that fascinating movie Rosemary's Baby with the tannis root.
Gosh, yeah, I never thought of it like that. You're right. Maybe it was tannis root. Maybe is there such a thing as tannis roots, or is that made up? I don't know. But it's got that kind of. Yeah, wow, yeah, I see where you're going. So there you go. Make of that what you will. This hypnotism and Cynthia Lennon also. Cynthia Lennon, the way that Cynthia and John split up, I think I might be wrong, but the way I remember it, just to add on to put some more meat to this, if it needs any more. When they split, when Cynthia and John split, the way I think it happened was Cynthia was on vacation. I think she was in Greece, or Spain, and she came back, and she found John and Yoko, but pretty much in bed together, naked. Or she came into the bedroom and Yoko was wearing Cynthia's. She came back to her house and Yoko was in the house and wearing Cynthia's nightgown or something, or her robe or something, and. I can't remember if it was on that day when she saw the two of them together or when she had to go back. I think it was I think she had to go back again. This was in her second. I think she's written 2 or 3 biographies. This was in her biography called John, which I think came out in 2015, I think, or 2005. Can't remember. But I think it was on the second time. She left the house. She just left the two of them in there. She didn't want to stay there. She just let John and Yoko at it and just didn't want anything to do with it and just left the house. I think she moved in with her mother. Like
the story of Jane Asher finding Paul and Linda in bed, apparently. It's like a parallel to that.
So what happened, I think I'm sort of kind of paraphrasing here, but just to add some more to this, she arranged a meeting with John to talk about the divorce or the separation and what to do with their son Julian and all this kind of like financial stuff and who's going to look after what and who and when and she turned up to this meeting and it took place at John's home and what was her home, and Yoko was there, and the way she describes it was John wasn't John. It was like it wasn't him. It's like she sat there to discuss this intricate important stuff and she's looking at John and it's not John. It's like she says it was another person.
Very telling phrase.
Yeah, Exactly, and Yoko was sitting there, I think, all in black. The way she describes it, and the way she describes it, she was sitting there, looking at her nails and picking her nails in a very kind of unsettling way, whilst John was sitting next to her with this kind of new, kind of different look and personality to him. Yeah. So make of that what you will. So yeah.
I think we can learn a lot from who John made songs about. So he made a song about his mother, Julia, going into these mother issues that he seemed to carry through his life. He made a couple of songs about Yoko, Dear Yoko, and the song Woman was about her. The song In My Life, the Beatles song, was in part said to be inspired by Stuart Sutcliffe and his memories of his friendship with him. And he even made a song about Paul with How Do You Sleep? But he never made a song about Cynthia, and he never made a song about his first son, Julian. He left that to McCartney with Hey Jude, apparently. But, maybe we get an indication as to who the key people were in his life through who he made songs about. And he made one about Sean, of course, Beautiful Boy, his second son.
Yeah, I mean, he does say that he did say, and a lot of people, and even McCartney, if it is McCartney, take that anyway, which way you want to, but it's been said. Let's not go down there.
Not this show.
No. So it has been said that Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was the song from the Sgt. Pepper album that John wrote, was based on a drawing that Julian had done when he was about 6 or 7.
Yeah, but he had to come up with some story as to why the initial spell LSD, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And you could also look at it as Lucifer in the Sky with Diamonds, perhaps even as well. Maybe there was a double. So, so even that is, debatable. So, yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spot on. I can't think of any to do with Cynthia.
I think Cynthia and Julian can feel a bit hard done by there in terms of their treatment by John. When you look at how besotted and devoted he seemed to be to Yoko and Sean, and you compare that with Cynthia and Julian.
Yeah, this is that contradictory thing again, where he talks about love, peace, and loving everyone, and the best way to get through life is to love, and through love, and everything. It's the answer. Yes is the answer. Love is the answer. I think that he used in one of his lyrics. I might be wrong, but
Mind Games, yeah.
Mind Games, yeah, from his hit Mind Games. And then at the same time, he's shutting certain people off within his family. To some extent, I think Yoko Ono is to blame for that. Certainly, Cynthia Lennon has said that she stated that quite a lot in her book, John, which I mentioned earlier. She makes more than the insinuation that it was Yoko that was kind of getting in the way, that John wanted certain things for Julian and for the Lennons, for the Lennon family in Liverpool, that he wanted them to have should he die, in terms of property and money, and what he wanted Julian to have.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yoko blocked some of John's memorabilia going to Julian after his death, apparently.
Yeah, and there was also a house as well. I can't remember again, but there's an insinuation or an allegation in Cynthia's book, John, that his half sister that he had, Julia, I can't remember her name. It wasn't Julia, was it? His half sister. I think it was actually Julia. Was it? No, I think it might have been. Yeah, I think it might have been Julia, his half sister. I might be wrong, but I think it was. But anyway, there was a house that he wanted her and her family to have, that John wanted them to have should he die. I don't know whose house it was. I think it might have been his Aunt Mimi's house. I think. But whatever, there was a house in Liverpool that was his, that he wanted them to have, and then once he died, Yoko kind of put the blocks on that, and it didn't go to them. It went somewhere else, and didn't go to the Lennon family in Liverpool at all. And so there are these claims that that she kind of blocked a lot of contact as well with certain people in Liverpool. Certainly when he was living at the Dakota in the 70s, during those latter years as well, that she put the sort of the kabush, put the blockers on it. Yeah.
It's more about bloody Yoko, this show, isn't it? Damn.
John, if you could talk about John, Yoko's going to be in there, It's unavoidable.
They come as a package. And I mentioned Julian and Sean there. And isn't it tragic when you look at their respective solo careers? Unfortunately, you find in imagery that accompanies their releases all this kind of occult, Illuminati, Masonic sort of symbolism. You've got Julian covering his one eye in many, many press photos, and Sean's got pyramids and bloody every piece of sort of occult symbolism you can think of adorning his artwork. And it does tend to suggest that they're a part of the industry machine, and they've been inducted into the ranks of, you know, those that control the industry, which is pretty tragic, really, when you reflect on the fact that these are both John's sons, and that's kind of like his legacy living on through these, and yet they're showing all this symbolism that suggests they're owned assets.
Yeah. There's that video. Was it the video that springs to mind for me with regards to Sean Lennon? I can't remember the name of the song. It came out about a year or two ago. Yeah, Claypool Delirium or whatever it was called. Can't remember the name of the song, but I certainly remember the video. And the video is about Jack Parsons, isn't it?
That's
the
right,
Crowleyite, who was also kind of like the. I don't think it's too grandiose to say that he was kind of like the forefather of NASA, wasn't he? He was an occultist, but who was a rocket scientist in the
JPL,
sort of early,
close buddies with
20th
L. Ron
century.
Hubbard as well of Scientology.
Yeah, that's right. And they were trying to make this moon child. They were trying to make this. Yeah, there was all this weird stuff going on. Yeah, and Sean Lennon made a video about it. A music video about it. So yeah, it does make you wonder what he's into and what kind of stuff he kind of gets into.
If John was genuinely rebelling against the system in his latter years and kind of going his own way and being a maverick and being a free spirit, then what are his sons doing rocking all this symbolism would be a reasonable question.
Yeah, maybe it's because he's not around. I'm not defending John. I'm not trying to say, hey everybody, I think John was a great guy, and I'm not trying to lie to myself. Perhaps it's because he's just not around anymore to be able to say to these guys, look, you're going in the wrong direction. Who knows? I mean, it only came out in the news quite recently, 22nd of September. I've got it here in front of me on my computer screen. I don't know too much about it. I haven't really given it too much. I haven't read it in any great depth. I just saw the headline. It reads, Julian Lennon receives a peace award from UNESCO. The honour was awarded to Julian Lennon on the International Day of Peace. Well, UNESCO is the UN, isn't it? It's United Nations.
That's
so,
right, yeah.
If so, it's
the New World Order by any other name.
Yeah, exactly. So why is he doing that? If he's so woke, if he's picked up anything from any good stuff that he might have picked up from John in terms of what I've been talking about earlier, where John is a bit disparaging about certain people within the political spectrum, within the radical activist section, or the way that he looked back on the 60s in that statement that he gave to Rolling Stone. But I don't know how Julian Lennon, thinks on that. Whether does he take any stock in that at all, or does he take it seriously, or is he just? I don't know. I don't know why. Again, it's what are they up to? Why is he, siding with UNESCO? Why is Julian Lennon doing that? Does he know what he's getting into?
So many questions, man.
Does he know what he's getting into? What does he know?
Yeah. We should talk about numerology just briefly when it comes to the nines, because the number 9 figured very prominently in John's life. Shout to Desiree, by the way, our co-collaborator on Magical Mystery Talk, who's got the number 9's blog. Well worth checking out. But so John was born on the 9th of October. He died on the 9th of December, at least in British time.
British time, yeah.
His son Sean was born on his birthday, again the 9th of October. John put out songs called Revolution Number 9, Number 9 Dream. He seems to have been fascinated by the number 9, and it seems to have kept cropping up in his life. So numerologists could have a field day with John and the Nines, couldn't they?
Oh, wow, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's the Beatles song, The One After 909, which is one of the very first songs that, if you believe that Lennon and McCartney wrote their own songs, that was one of the very first songs that they wrote back in the early 60s. And I think it didn't. Well, I don't think. I know it was one of their earliest songs, but it didn't actually come out on a Beatles album until 1970s Let It Be. But yeah, so there's that one as well, the one after 909. I've actually written down some of these nines because I thought you might mention it. I think certainly John Lennon was aware of all this. He did talk about it, and he was aware of the significance of 9 and how it worked out in his life. I think
it's said to be the God number in occult studies, isn't it?
Right. Okay. I think it was Ray Coleman, the journalist, and also Beatles fans will know that he's written 1 or 2 books about the Beatles in his time. He also wrote John Lennon, a biography about John Lennon, and it's in one of those biographies of John Lennon that he wrote, or in one particular one, he actually put down the list. I think he was the first one to actually put down the list. How many years ago he did this, but he put down the list. So as you say, and I've got a few of them here, I've just picked out a few of them, and they do all seem to be, the nines do seem to work within areas of Lennon's life which were the most pivotal, like signpost points in his life. For example, you got, like you say, he was born on the 9th. He was born at 6:30 p.m. So 6 plus 3 is 9. His mother's address at the time he was born was 9 Newcastle Road, and Newcastle has 9 letters. His mother, as we mentioned earlier, was run over by an off-duty police officer, a drunken driver. The car's registration was LKF 630, so you got 63 equals 9. The drunk driver was an off-duty policeman, and his badge number, he was a constable, his number was 126. So we got 1 plus 2 plus 6, we got 9. Then we got Brian Epstein, who would go on to be the Beatles manager and make them famous, of course, and change their lives. And he was first introduced to them, or he introduced himself to the Beatles at the Cavern on November 9th, 1961, and they officially split. The Beatles officially split 9 years later. Epstein died in 1967 on August 27th, 2007. 7 plus 2 is 9. The Beatles received their record contract from EMI in 1962 on May 9th, and they produced many of their hits, of course, at EMI's studios at Abbey Road. Abbey Road has 9 letters, and it goes on my list here that I've written down. The Beatles made their first appearance in the all-important America, because, of course, back in those days, well, even now, if you really want to make it, if you're a British act, you really want to become worldwide, you have to go to America to make it. And they made their first appearance in America on the Ed Sullivan Show, of course, and that was on February 9th, 1964. John met Cynthia for the first time. When he met her, she was living at 18 Trinity Road, his first wife, so that's 8 plus 1 is 9. Julian was born at a hospital in Liverpool with the address, it was in Smithdown Road in Liverpool, and the address was 126, so we got 1 plus 2 plus 6. At Smithdown Road, Smithdown has 9 letters, and it just goes on and on and on. I noticed one actually, post-Beatles, okay. I've noticed that during his post-Beatles years, or his post-Beatles years, he released a total of 8 albums, okay. I think one of those was a compilation, but he released a total of 8, and he was in the process of recording a 9th when he was killed. So he was actually in the process. So he would have had, and he did. It came out posthumously in 1984, and that was the album Milk and Honey, which I think Nobody Told Me is on, which we mentioned before. So so there you go, 9 again. And as you say, he was shot on December 9th, GMT in England. It was December 8th in America, but due to the time difference, it was the 9th. And Number 9 Dream. Can you guess, Mark, what number that got to in the US singles chart when it was released?
7.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I probably can guess.
9.
Wouldn't it be an absolute trip if John were still alive and he was listening to this. Can you imagine? I don't go for that theory. I know it's one that's been touted by a few people. Miles Mathis put out this article a few years ago claiming that John somehow faked his death and he's still alive and well, and he's working as a musician under the name Mark Stacer and still performing. As I say, I don't go for that, but what a trip it would be if he actually was 80 years of age and still out there in a scenario reminiscent of the latter scene in the movie Yesterday, where he's living in this cottage by the seaside and just enjoying the quiet life. Wouldn't that be crazy?
But that would be crazy. But would he be able to keep his mouth shut with all this craziness that is going on? Would he be able to keep his mouth shut?
Yeah,
would
for 40 years. I very much doubt it.
The Afghanistan war, 9/11, Reaganism, Margaret Thatcher, Thatcherism, COVID, Corona.
I know.
Yes.
Another question for me would be, where are his like today? We've just spoken for 2 hours about the fascinating complexities of this man and the contradictions and the artistry of him. Can you imagine having this kind of conversation about anyone else when they reach 80 years of age, any other musician that's going to captivate people's imaginations as much as John Lennon did? Where are his like? To my thinking, there's nobody to measure up to him. There's nobody to compare to him in the world of artistry right now.
You might be right.
I mean, will we be talking about Ed Sheeran in these terms in 40 years? Probably not.
It's the thing about John Lennon is. He was actually, and this is what, and we talk about how would he, we sort of like if we like spin this right back to what we were talking about right nearly at the beginning of all this, how would he be talking about Corona, COVID, 9/11, and so on and so on? I've just found a piece of paper here some notes that I wrote for us to talk about, and I thought, I mentioned this guy before earlier, a guy by the name of Robin Blackwell, the Marxist, the so-called Marxist, the political activist from the late 60s, who kind of like mixed with John for a little while. He associated himself with him because they sort of hung around in that kind of, that world back then, in that sort of activist kind of world back in the late 60s, early 70s. According to Robin Blackwell, he claims that Lennon, and I've taken this quote from a book I can't remember the name of, but this is what Blackwell is quoting. I think that's his name, Robin Blackwell. He claims, and I quote, that Lennon back in the early 70s was in the process of setting up a project with a not very well associated, I'll start again. He was in the process of setting up a project with a not very well assorted group of people who are into alternative technology, alternative media, alternative politics, and alternative lifestyles. Of course, that never came to pass, but that kind of like ties into the reason I'm mentioning that is because it kind of ties into what you were just mentioning there. What massive? I mean, if that's true, okay, that. Basically, for want of a better word, for want of a better term, and I really am struggling here for a want of a better term, but I'm just going to use this because I'm too lazy to think of anything else. But doesn't that, to you, sound like a truther, as we would now call them?
Absolutely. When you mentioned hidden technology there, I was thinking of Tesla technology and all that we hear about free energy and stuff. That's what came to mind.
Exactly. So, in the last kind of 10, 15 years since the internet's really taken off, and we now have this alternative world where we have the alternative media. We certainly have the alternative politics. We have, researchers or activists, if you like, within the alternative field, the so-called alternative field, that are outside of the mainstream, that are pushing us to look at life in a different way and to go out and demonstrate and do this, that, and the other. And also alternative technology, and also alternative lifestyles in terms of getting away from chemotherapy and trying a homeopathic way of life and organic food. And so this is John Lennon. If this is true, John Lennon was was going to go for this, according to this quote, if it's true, not in 2008, obviously, to 2020, but back in the early 70s. So yeah, this is like a proto-truther, for want of a better word.
Decades ahead of his time.
Decades ahead of his time, if it's true, and if he was genuine if he did say this, was he being genuine? I've got no reason to believe that he wasn't. And he was also an acquaintance and a supporter and a financial supporter and a fan of Mae Brussell, who was, I don't think I'm wrong in saying or stating that Mae Brussell was in effect kind of like the first alternative
conspiracy researcher.
She sort of came to the fore just after the Kennedy JFK assassination.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what made her name. She kind of became like an alternative researcher, and since then she looked at the Manson killings and ironically, sad irony, she also looked into the John Lennon's death in 1981. If you go look on the internet, you can find her radio shows where I think her theory is that the Manson killings, I might be wrong, but I think her theory was that the Manson killings was a conspiracy to kind of
derail the hippie scene.
Yeah, derail the hippie thing. Yeah, tie the hippie thing to this long-haired Manson and say to the mainstream, hey, look, everybody, this is what you get with the counterculture and hippies and peace and love. You get mass murderers.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a financial supporter of Mae Brussell, and if I'm not mistaken, and I do seem to recall, and I think it is on YouTube, so you can check me out if I'm wrong. John Lennon did actually appear in an interview with Mae Brussell. Mae Brussell did actually interview John and Yoko back in the early 70s. So then that gets you to thinking, again, this is going back to what we were discussing earlier, regarding Julian and Sean and other bits and pieces. Just how switched on was John Lennon? Was he aware of some of this alternative stuff that was going on?
Yep. Always more questions than answers with John.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, we'll start to wrap up here, mate. Fascinating conversation. By the way, for anyone listening, if you're wondering why we've not covered John's assassination in 1980, we're saving that one for an episode of Magical Mystery Talk, which we're going to do at the end of this year, December, marking the 40th anniversary of that event. We'll have Desiree with us, and we'll really go to town on analysing that particular event. So hope you'll join us for that. The Magical Mystery Talk series, we've done, 3 now, is it?
I think it's 3, yeah.
We've done 3 episodes, yeah. So plenty more Beatles-related stuff in that series. This one is a kind of extra to that. Now, Matt, you had no idea what I was going to ask you today. It's been a free-flow, spontaneous conversation. And I want to end by asking you, what would be your favourite song of John's, if I had to put you on the spot right now?
Oh, no, I hate this kind of thing. Oh, God, because I always have different favourites every day.
Well, you can give me 3 if you want.
Okay, off the top of my head. Has it got to be John out of the Beatles or in the Beatles?
No, it can be a John song from within the Beatles.
Okay, 3. Oh, my goodness. There's so many to choose from, man. And these are in no specific order. I think, all right, I'm going to go for songs that I don't get bored of hearing every day. Okay, so if I had to choose songs that I had to listen to every day, okay, this is what I'm going with. Songs that if I had to choose songs that I listen to every day that I wouldn't get bored of. So I would pick, I think, A Day in the Life, because it's a goosebumps song. Just the way the orchestra just builds and builds and builds. I just love the drama in that piece. The way that the orchestra just wells up and everything, and it's got kind of an alarmism to it. The way that John kind of and Paul even in the back kind of wail in the back with the echo, with the reverb on their voices, and it's got that kind of alarming.
It's got an alarm clock in it as well.
Feeling. Yeah, the alarm clock that Mal Evans, their roadie, was counting down. So yeah, that would be one. Definitely not Imagine. Ugh, no thank you. Oh man, I don't know.
Well, I'll just jump in and say, the 3 that I'd written down would be In My Life, which is my favourite track that he wrote for the Beatles. I think that's wonderfully reflective and just beautiful song. Watching the Wheels, which has lyrics for us all.
Oh, yeah.
People say I'm crazy doing what I'm doing. Give me all kinds of warning to save me from ruin. I mean, that's a conspiracy theorist's anthem right there. And he just goes on to say he's happy that way. He had to let the merry-go-round go and get off the organised society hamster wheel, and life is so much better this way. I can relate to that. And Number 9 Dream, which is just beautifully metaphysical and spiritual and just amazing.
And I think that is May Pang. You know the bits in that song in Number 9 Dream where you hear someone saying John.
Yeah.
I think that's actually May Pang.
Apparently so, yeah.
Yeah, apparently so. I just remember, I this is really weird. A couple of years ago, when we were still allowed to live a fairly normal life, I did go to Liverpool, and I did go on that Magical Mystery Tour bus thing, where they take you around kind of like the sights of Liverpool. They show you the
in the before
sites.
times.
Yeah, in the before times. By gum lad, that were a while ago, and the guy that was, they had like a tour guide in the coach in the bus who was on with the microphone, and he was giving little stories and stuff. And just one of the stories was about this off-duty police officer. And I just thought I'd mention this because it's still sticking in my head throughout our chat today. It just won't go away. And my editing system in my head is saying, don't mention it. It's not worth it. It's not relevant. But it's still there. It's still hanging in my head. That off-duty policeman, and I might have got this wrong, but from what I recall, what the tour guide said was he was sacked from his job for that, I think, for that very incident where John's mother was killed. And he became a postman. And he ended up having to deliver letters to Aunt Mimi's house.
Wow.
So I think that's how he did it. I think it was either Aunt Mimi's house or Julia's boyfriend who she was with at his house, or both. But yeah, that's what happened. So it was like you talk about instant karma.
Strange fate, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what he had to deal with.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll call it a day there then, Matt. Thanks very much for joining me today on this momentous occasion. We'll be back in December, as I say, to do the 40th anniversary of John's tragic passing. Magical Mystery Talk will be back. Other than that, do you just want to remind people where they can find your blogs online?
Yeah, sure. Well, you've got the Occult Beatles. That's at WordPress. If you just type into a search engine, the Occult Beatles, I think it should come up. But yeah, it's a WordPress site. And that is fairly regularly updated. It's not one of these sites where you go to every few months and it's still the same article from 3 years ago. It's regularly updated, fairly regularly updated. So do tune in, folks. Do come back and forth to that, or join it, subscribe to it. Also, there's the Conspiro Media site. I've done a bit of a refurbishment on that site. It's got a new look to it, and that's kind of like for the main reason I've refurbished that is because I'm gearing it towards more of my other main area of research, which I've mentioned a little bit earlier, which is the 1960s counterculture. I've spent the last 3 or so years looking at the counterculture scene in London to see if it has any kind of parallels to the Laurel Canyon scene in the US. Because if it was going on in America the way that David McGowan suggested in his books and in his research, then it must have been going on in London. So a lot of the stuff that I used to research on my Conspiro Media site in the past, which was mostly more to do with topical things like rappers, well-known rappers of the time, or Nicki Minaj, or kind of Britney Spears type things, I've kind of like pushed that to the side. And if you go look at the emphasis of the site now, it's more to do, I'm posting, it's more to do with the 60s stuff now. So anything that you see on that site from now on is going to be about my research into that. But that's an ongoing thing. It's going to take a few years. So be patient with that. Do keep tuning into that site. You'll see articles coming on that site every now and again to do with the 60s counterculture scene and Britain and London predominantly. And finally, if you want a compilation of both the sites and maybe a little bit more, you can go to the Conspiro Media Facebook page, where I post everything from both sites, and also, like I say, some extra little bits and pieces as well. So that's Conspiro Media at Facebook, Conspiro, CONSPIRO Media. So yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. And yeah,
it was a worthwhile thing, man. And just to mention, Desiree, our partner on Magical Mystery Talk, she's got a blog called the Number 9 Blog, all spelt out, .wordpress.com. So the Number 9 Blog at WordPress, and she gets into all this good stuff as well, and she's got a lot of knowledge. So thanks for coming on today, Matt. It's been good to have a distraction, to be honest, from other things. But I'm sure they'll still be there tomorrow.
Yeah, it did get mentioned.
Well, it had to, really, didn't it?
This is just a wrap.
I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up